A woman in rural North Carolina offered food to a dog. The next day, it appeared on her porch with a heart-stopping surprise. Sarah had placed the bowl of food outside her gate for the shivering Border Collie she'd never seen before. The dog was thin and looked abandoned, yet carried itself with a strange kind of pride. She didn't expect to see it again. But the next morning, there it was, sitting quietly beside her front steps. This time, it wasn't alone, and what it brought with it would break your heart, and then heal it. The rain had been falling for hours. It streamed in sheets from the worn-out gutters of the small white house, nestled in the quiet foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside, Sarah, 53, poured her second cup of coffee and stared out the kitchen window into the grey morning. She was used to the quiet. Her children were grown, and her husband, Michael, had passed away nearly a decade ago. Most days unfolded just like the one before, but this day would be different. That morning, as she stepped onto the porch with her steaming mug, something unusual caught her eye. Just by the gate stood a dog, soaked and trembling, but it wasn't just any dog. It was a Border Collie, large and watchful, its eyes intelligent even in the rain. Sarah caught her breath. She knew that look. Her husband, Michael, had been part of a K9 unit for years. The proud, focused stance was unusual for any stray, but it was immediately recognizable as the mark of training. This was no ordinary stray. But the dog looked hungry. Its ribs were faintly visible beneath its wet, black and white coat, and its paws were caked in mud. It didn't bark or move. It just stood there, watching her with a quiet patience, as if it were waiting for something. Sarah set her coffee mug down and walked slowly into the rain. Without a word, she went back inside and returned a moment later with a bowl filled with leftover pot roast and a piece of cornbread. She placed it gently just inside the gate and watched from a distance. "You look like you've been through a war," she murmured. The dog didn't move at first. Then, after a few moments, it approached with a calm, deliberate slowness and began to eat. There was a gravity to its presence, as if it carried an invisible weight. Sarah stood there, arms crossed against the cold, watching in silence. When it finished eating, the dog looked at her again. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Then, as quietly as it had come, the dog turned and vanished into the thick woods across the road. That night, Sarah didn't sleep well. She kept wondering about the dog. Where had it come from? Why did it seem so disciplined, so full of purpose? There was no collar, no tags, no panic, just presence. She was about to tell herself it was a one-time thing, a wandering soul just passing through. But the next morning, as the sun began to break through the clouds, she opened her door and froze. The dog was there, sitting right in front of her door, calm and poised, soaked again, but this time was different. It wasn't alone. Beside it was something, a bundle of some kind. Sarah walked forward slowly, her heart beating a little faster. The Border Collie didn't move, didn't even blink as she approached. It allowed her to get close. And when she looked down at what it had brought, her knees nearly gave out. It was an old, scratched, and weathered police badge, the kind her husband used to wear, from the Pine Ridge County Sheriff's Office. Lying next to it, wrapped in a torn piece of a uniform, a tiny puppy, barely old enough to walk, was whimpering softly. Tears welled in her eyes before she even understood why. The Border Collie looked at her, its gaze steady and unblinking. It wasn't asking for help. It was giving her something. A gift, a message, something that had no words. Sarah knelt, her trembling hand reaching for the cloth. The puppy stirred, letting out a tiny squeak. As her fingers brushed against the badge, something clicked inside her, and a flood of memories washed over her. Her husband's laugh, the way he would lean down and whisper to his canine partner as if it were a child. The smell of his uniform when he came home after a long shift. And now, this. She looked up at the Border Collie, her voice catching. "Who are you?" The dog, of course, didn't answer. It just sat beside her, as if it was standing guard. And maybe it was. That moment was only the beginning. Because what she would discover in the coming days about this mysterious dog, the puppy it brought, and the badge it carried would unravel a story that had been buried for 5 long years. And it all started with a single meal, offered on a rainy morning. Sarah brought the puppy inside first. It was shivering, soaked to the bone, and weighed no more than a bag of sugar. She wrapped it in a towel, murmuring soft words without thinking, words she used to say to her own children when they were small. "It's okay, little one, you're safe now." The Border Collie didn't come in right away. It sat on the porch like a silent sentinel, watching, waiting. She opened the door a crack. "You can come in, too," she said softly. "I won't bite." It took a few seconds. But finally, the dog rose and stepped inside with careful, almost solemn steps, as if entering a sacred space. Its eyes scanned the room once. Then it settled near the fireplace as if it had been there 100 times before. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the badge. She had placed it carefully on the kitchen counter, next to the folded piece of fabric. Her hands still shook when she touched it. The numbers etched into the metal were barely visible through the scratches and mud. But it was the name engraved on the back that made her gasp and sink into a chair. "Oh, Miller." Sarah's hand went to her lips. Owen Miller, that was the name of her husband Michael's last partner. A young deputy, fresh out of the academy, who had been paired with a police dog named Leo. Leo, a border collie celebrated within the department's special program for his unmatched loyalty and quiet tracking abilities. She remembered the dog, too, with his sharp, ever-watchful eyes. He and Owen had been inseparable. But Owen Miller had disappeared during a search operation 5 years ago. Everyone assumed he had drowned in the river that bordered the national forest. His patrol car was found abandoned. But there was no body, no dog, no trace, until now. She looked at the border collie. "Are you, Leo?" she whispered. The dog didn't move, but as she stood and slowly walked toward it, something strange happened. It lifted a paw and gently placed it on her arm. She gasped, not from the touch, but from what was tied to its leg. Another piece of fabric, a different kind of scrap. She slowly untied it and opened the damp cloth. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic, was a USB drive. Her heart stopped. She didn't know what was on it. But the look in Leo's eyes, because she was sure now that it was him, told her this was no accident. No mere coincidence. He had come for a reason. She was up nearly all night. The puppy was fed, cleaned, and curled up in a blanket by the fire. Leo, Rue, lay beside it, a protective watchman. Sarah sat at the old desktop computer her son had left behind years ago and, with trembling hands, inserted the USB. A single folder was named, for Sarah. She clicked it. There were dozens of files. Videos, audio recordings, a journal written in a Word document. The first video was recorded 2 weeks before Owen disappeared. His face appeared on the screen. Unshaven, tired, a sad smile on his lips. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means Leo found you. Or that someone was kind enough to listen." Sarah's chest tightened. "I knew this assignment was going bad. Something was wrong with the way they sent us out there. I can't go into detail now. But if something happens to me, Leo knows where to go. I told him everything. He remembers. He always remembers." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this, Sarah," he continued, "but I trusted Leo to bring this to you. You were always kind. You always believed in what we did. And I knew you'd understand what it means to take care of someone, even when they're gone." The video ended. She sat back, her body numb. 5 years. 5 years since anyone had seen Owen Miller. And now this. The border collie had brought not just a puppy, but a message from a dead man. A man who had trusted this animal so deeply he had made him the keeper of his last words. And the question was, why now? Why come back after all these years? She glanced over at Leo. He was awake, his eyes fixed on her, unblinking. The answer wasn't in words. It never would be, but something was coming, and Leo had brought it to her doorstep. The next morning, the sky was clear for the first time in days. Sarah stood on her porch, a cup of tea in her hands, staring into the woods across the road. Sunlight streamed through the tall pine trees, dancing on the wet ground as if trying to erase the weight of everything that had happened. But nothing could erase it now. Inside, the puppy, whom she had started calling Scout, stirred under a blanket by the hearth, yawning and letting out a tiny squeak. Leo lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes wide open, always watching, always alert. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept returning to the video, the sound of Owen Miller's voice echoing in her living room. The look in his eyes, the pain he carried then. He knew something deeper than he could say on camera. And Leo remembered. How far had Leo carried that USB, hidden in a piece of cloth? And more than that, Leo had chosen her. That morning, she knelt beside the dog, gently stroking the thick, dark fur around his neck. "You've done more than anyone, haven't you, boy?" she whispered. "But why now?" There was no answer, but there was something in the dog's eyes that told her the story wasn't over. After feeding Scout and leaving more food for Leo, which he ate, but never in a hurry, Sarah went back to the computer and opened another file on the USB. It was a journal entry. April 7th, Leo and I found another trail marker in the woods today, same as the ones last month. I reported it, but they dismissed it as kids playing pranks. I don't think so, neither does Leo. He's been on edge for days. Something is watching us out here. Sarah scrolled. April 12th, they pulled my backup unit. No warning. Now it's just me and Leo. Radio contact is dead in certain parts of this area. No explanation. I can't prove it, but I think someone wants us silenced. I found a buried uniform today. Down by the creek. It had a badge number and blood on it. Her stomach clenched. She had never heard any of this. Owen's disappearance had been ruled an accident. A tragic loss. That's what they told her when she asked too many questions. Now it seemed someone had been lying. She printed the journal entries, highlighting key details, badge numbers, dates, GPS coordinates, if there was even a small chance someone had covered up Owen's death. She owed it to him, and to Leo, to find the truth. She wasn't sure who she could trust. But she knew one thing, Leo hadn't come back just to be done with it. He had come back because something was unfinished. That afternoon, she took Leo and the puppy, Scout, into the backyard. The space was fenced and large, with plenty of oak trees and soft moss. A good place to think. Scout stumbled through the grass, tripping over his own paws, while Leo stayed close behind him like a silent shadow. Sarah sat on the steps and watched them. She saw how Leo's eyes never left the tree line, how his ears would twitch back at every shift in the wind. It wasn't just habit. Leo was searching. He was waiting. Whatever they had faced in those woods 5 years ago, Leo still remembered it. That evening, Sarah finally made a decision. She called an old friend, Detective Isabella Rossi of the State Bureau of Investigation. They hadn't spoken in years, but Izzy was one of the few people her husband had trusted. She was tough, honest, and not afraid to make people uncomfortable. As Sarah told her everything, the dog, the badge, the USB, the other end of the line was silent. Then, Rossi said, "Don't talk to anyone else about this. You hear me, Sarah? No one. I'll be there tomorrow." Sarah hung up the phone, her hands shaking. What Leo had brought to her door wasn't just a gift. It was a warning, a clue, a message from the past that was waiting for justice. And justice came with a price. As night fell, Leo lay at the foot of her bed, with Scout curled up beside him. She stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding, because she knew, in her gut, that whatever danger had taken Owen Miller hadn't gone away. It was still out there, waiting. Detective Isabella Rossi arrived early the next morning. She stepped out of a dusty SUV with a look of determination, her black boots crunching on the gravel. Sarah hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years, but the woman hadn't changed much. Short hair, sharp eyes, and a stern demeanor that always made people stand a little straighter. As Rossi pulled in, Leo was instantly at the window. No growl, no bark, just a silent, unmoving watch. "You weren't kidding," Rossi said, walking up to the porch and looking at Leo. "That's a trained dog, one of the best trained canines I've ever seen." "He's more than that," Sarah said. "He remembers everything, and he brought this back." She handed the badge and the cloth to Rossi. Rossi sat at the kitchen counter while Sarah made coffee. For the next hour, they went over the journal entries, the videos, the GPS coordinates. Rossi's jaw tightened as she read Owen's words. None of this was in the final report. She muttered, "When he went missing, they told us the case was closed. They found scuff marks near the river and assumed he fell in." "They were lying," Sarah said quietly. Rossi nodded. "They were lying." Outside, Leo was slowly pacing the yard, ears pricked, nose to the wind. Scout toddled after him, clumsy and playful, completely unaware of the storm gathering around them. "We need to go out there," Rossi said, standing up. "I want to see the place he wrote about in the journal. These coordinates point deep into the forest, off any marked trail." "You're going?" Sarah hesitated. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't even sure she had that kind of courage. But something had changed in her since Leo showed up. A part of her that had been dormant had woken up. "I'm going with you," she said. She left food and water for Scout. The puppy let out a sad little whine as she closed the door. Leo jumped straight into the back of Rossi's SUV, as if he knew exactly where they were going. They drove for nearly an hour, winding down narrow, unpaved roads into the dense forest. Rossi parked near a rusted gate that hadn't been used in years. Beyond it, the woods grew even thicker. "GPS says it's another mile from here," Rossi said. "You okay?" Sarah nodded. Leo was already ahead of them, ears high, tail straight, moving without hesitation. They followed him. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no wind, just the crunch of leaves under their boots and the occasional snap of a twig. After about 30 minutes, Leo stopped dead. His nose hovered inches from the ground, sniffing with purpose. Then, without warning, he turned left, heading off the path and deeper into the trees. "Should we trust him?" Rossi asked. Sarah didn't answer. She just followed. And then they saw it. A clearing. overgrown and forgotten, but in the center of it was a small mound of earth with stones piled haphazardly on top, looking like a crude grave. Rossi froze. Oh, God! Sarah moved forward, her heart seizing. There, tucked between the stones and half buried, was a scrap of an old uniform. It was barely visible, but unmistakable, and next to it, sticking out of the dirt, was a second badge. Rossi knelt and gently cleared away the soil. The name on it sent a chill down her spine. A. Danley, Rossi whispered. Deputy Danley was on the missing persons list 2 years ago. Different county, no official connection to Owen. But now there is. Leo circled the grave once, then sat beside it. His back was straight, his gaze fixed forward like a soldier at attention. This was deliberate, Rossi said. Someone didn't want 'em found. Someone covered all this up. They stood there in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of the truth. Suddenly, from deep in the woods, came the distinct sound of a snapping branch. Rossi had her weapon out in an instant. Get behind me. Leo let out a low growl. It was the growl of a dog trained not just to defend, but to fight. The trees rustled again, then silence. Rossi scanned their surroundings, her eyes sharp, her grip tight on her gun. But nothing emerged. Still, they weren't alone. Sarah's heart was hammering. Whoever buried those officers was still watching. They didn't speak on the way back. Rossi kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near her holster. Leo lay in the back, his eyes wide open, as if he expected something, or someone, to follow them out of the woods. When they got home, Sarah rushed to check on Scout. The puppy yelped once as she opened the door, his little tail wagging in relief. He was unharmed, but the house now felt different, exposed, as if whatever had been lurking in the forest had followed him home. Inside, Rossi paced the living room, a phone to her ear. She was trying to reach an old contact in internal affairs, but the signal kept breaking up. I don't like this, she grumbled, snapping the phone shut. A second badge is no coincidence. 2 deputies, 2 different departments, both vanished without a trace. This is a pattern, and I'll bet anything it's not over. Sarah stared at Leo. The dog was now sitting near the front door, head low but alert. He hadn't relaxed once since they left the clearing. She walked over and knelt beside him. You knew, didn't you? She whispered. You knew they were out there all along. Leo didn't respond, but as Sarah put a hand on his shoulder, she could feel his body trembling ever so slightly. Not from fear, but from focus. Leo was waiting. Just after nightfall, it came, a knock on the door. Not a friendly knock, but 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Rossi froze. Leo was on his feet in an instant, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His lips curled back to reveal his teeth. The knock came again, harder this time. Sarah moved toward the window, but Rossi grabbed her arm. Don't, stay back, let me handle this. She pulled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch and squinted. A man was standing on her porch. Alone, he stood as if he owned the place. Leo's growl grew deeper, darker, a warning. Rossi opened the door a few inches, her own badge clipped to her neck, her hand still near her gun. Can I help you? The man didn't smile. He was tall, in his late 50s, with a clean-shaven face and a voice that was too smooth. I'm looking for a dog, he said, a large border collie, name's Leo. Rossi's body tensed. Why? He's government property, the man stated flatly. Went missing during an operation years ago. Classified unit. He shouldn't be out in the open. Rossi's voice went low. That's funny, because I have a report here that says Leo died along with his handler. The man's smile faded. Those reports were filed on orders. The situation has changed. Sarah felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Ignoring Rossi's warning look, she stepped forward. He brought a badge back, she said, her voice shaking but firm. 2 of them, now, and a hard drive full of information. If you're trying to get him back, why now? The man looked at her, and for a brief second, something flickered in his eyes, a flash of annoyance. Or maybe fear. This doesn't concern you, ma'am, he said bluntly, for your own good. Before Rossi could respond, Leo moved, silent as a shadow, and stood between them and the open door. His teeth were fully bared now. A deep, primal snarl escaped his chest. The man held up his hands. That dog is trained to obey commands. Rossi narrowed her eyes. Looks to me like he has new orders. The man said nothing more. He turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the darkness without another word. But Sarah had seen it. Before the man turned away, his gaze had settled on Scout. And in that look, there was something that scared her more than the knocking, more than the grave in the woods. They weren't just after Leo. They were after what he was protecting. After locking the doors and drawing every curtain, Sarah sat on the floor beside her 2 dogs. Leo leaned against her gently, his eyes sweeping the room. Ever vigilant, Scout was curled in her lap, utterly oblivious to the magnitude of the danger that surrounded them. "They'll be back," Rossi said quietly. "This isn't over." Sarah nodded, stroking Leo's fur. "I know," she said, "but this time, we're not the ones running." And outside, just beyond the trees, a pair of headlights flashed once through the pines, and then went dark. The night passed long and restless. Rossi dozed in an armchair in the living room, her gun beside her. Sarah sat curled on the floor near Leo and Scout, a flashlight flickering on the table next to her. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind against the windows, made her jump. But Leo didn't move. He was utterly still, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was listening, always listening. Just before dawn, Sarah heard a sound, a whine. It was quieter than a whisper. She sat up instantly. It was Leo, not a sound of fear or pain, but a sound that was almost memory, longing. She put her hand on the dog's black and white coat. Leo was staring at the front door, his ears angled back slightly. His tail was still, but in his eyes now was not the soldier-like focus from before, but something older, softer. "You want to show me?" she asked. Leo stood and walked to the door without hesitation. Sarah glanced at Rossi, who was now awake and watching them. "I don't think he wants to run," Sarah whispered. "I think he wants to finish something." Rossi stood and grabbed her coat. "Then let's finish it." They left Scout bundled in a blanket. Safe, Leo led them down the road and into the woods before the sun was fully up. But this time, Leo wasn't searching, he knew. They followed him for about a mile. Then, Leo stopped at the base of a moss-covered oak tree. It didn't look special, just another forgotten landmark in the vast North Carolina forest. But Leo sat beside it and began to dig at the ground. Sarah and Rossi exchanged a look. Rossi knelt and brushed away the damp leaves. Underneath was a plastic bag. It was sealed tight with tape, old and yellowed with time. Inside were photographs, printed documents, and a folded piece of paper. The photos were blurry, but clear enough. Men in uniforms. One of them Sheriff Thompson, making exchanges on the forest trails, passing money. On the back, Owen had scrawled dates in his handwriting. And the documents, unit transfer orders, internal memos. One name appeared again and again, Sheriff Thompson. The folded paper was a letter, addressed to Rossi. She opened it with trembling hands. "Izzy, if Leo found you, it means I didn't make it out. I don't know who to trust anymore. But I trust you." Thompson was running a smuggling ring, using specially trained K9s as untraceable mules. "The badges you found, Danley figured it out first. They made sure he'd never be found. I was next. Leo saw everything. He knows. Don't let this die with me." Rossi slowly folded the letter. Her jaw clenched. "They killed him to bury this. And Leo's been carrying the truth all this time," Sarah whispered. Suddenly, Leo barked, sharp and loud. An answering shout echoed from deeper in the woods. Voices, the sound of boots crashing through the undergrowth. "They found us," Rossi said, standing and drawing her weapon. "Go." They ran. Leo led them, guiding them through a series of narrow game trails, weaving between thickets and rocks. But Leo wasn't running blind. He had memorized every inch of this forest. Directly ahead, they saw it, an old, half-collapsed structure, an abandoned fire lookout tower, forgotten by time. Inside, Rossi yelled. They dove through the doorway just as the first bullet splintered the wood of a tree near Sarah's head. Inside, Rossi kicked over a rotted table and used it for cover. Sarah huddled behind it, heart pounding, clutching the bag of evidence. Leo stood by the doorway, body tense, eyes fixed on the approaching shadows. "Cell signal?" Sarah shouted. Rossi shook her head. "We're in a dead zone. But I left a trace on my car's dispatch system. If I'm out of contact for too long, command will know. We just have to hold out." Another shot, then another, but Leo didn't flinch. He took a small step forward, shielding them, just as he had always done. And Sarah, with fear in her chest, finally understood. This wasn't just about justice. This was about a promise. About loyalty. This was the final mission Leo had been carrying for 5 long years. And now, it was almost complete. The gunfire stopped for a moment. The forest was dead silent. Rossi crouched behind the table, breathing heavily, weapon held tight. Sarah hugged the evidence bag to her chest. Unable to speak, Leo stood by the door, still proud, still waiting. A voice called out from the trees. "You don't have to die for a damn dog, detective." A bitter smile touched Rossi's lips. "He's not just a dog," she muttered. "He's the only one who didn't forget." Another voice shouted, "Closer now. Hand over the Border Collie and we walk away. That's all." Leo didn't move, he didn't even growl, he just waited. Sarah gently touched the dog's back. "You don't have to do any more," she whispered. "You've done enough." But she knew, in her heart, that this was the only way Leo could complete what Owen had started. For Leo, loyalty wasn't a word, it was breath, and blood, and bone. Rossi looked at Sarah, her voice low. "They're going to rush us. When they do, you run, take the puppy, take the bag, and head east. I'll hold 'em off." "No," Sarah said, "we stay together." Before Rossi could argue, Leo suddenly barked, a sharp, commanding sound, and launched himself through a broken window frame. "Leo, no!" But he was already in the fight. What followed was chaos, shouts, footsteps, the sound of a struggle in the trees. A man screamed, then another gunshot. Rossi scrambled to follow Leo out, with Sarah seconds behind her. They found a man on the ground under the trees, unconscious, his face bloody. Leo stood over him, his chest heaving. The other two assailants had vanished into the woods. But Leo had done what he came to do. He had stopped them, he had protected them. And now, he stood unmoving, blood pouring from a wound in his leg. Sarah knelt beside him. "Oh, no, boy." She took off her jacket and pressed it against the wound. Leo leaned against her, exhausted but proud. His body was trembling, but his eyes never closed. "He needs help," she whispered. Rossi nodded. "Let's get him out of here." They gently carried Leo to Rossi's SUV and sped back toward town, racing through the trees like ghosts escaping the forest. The moment they hit cell range, Rossi made the call. "Officer down. Repeat, officer down. K9 Leo is hit. I have evidence of a classified cover-up and attempted murder. I need full backup and an immediate response." By the time they reached the edge of town, sirens were already screaming from every direction. Leo was rushed to the local animal hospital. The veterinarian was an ex-military man who had worked with police dogs for years. He took one look at the badge Sarah was holding, at the blood on her hands, and said only one thing: "We'll do everything we can." Hours passed. Sarah sat in the waiting room, holding Scout, who had been brought to her by another officer. The puppy was fast asleep, unaware that the dog who had carried him out of the darkness was now fighting for his life. Rossi paced nearby, her phone pressed to her ear. 3 state agencies were now involved. The man Leo had taken down was in custody. The documents were being verified. The USB, every video, every journal page, was enough to bring down the entire sheriff's department. Sheriff Thompson was arrested later that day. When the vet finally emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, Sarah stood so fast the chair fell over behind her. "He's going to be okay," the vet said. Sarah's knees gave out, and Rossi caught her just in time. "You hear that, Leo?" she whispered through her tears. "You're not done yet." A few days later, Leo came home. He walked slowly at first, his leg bandaged and his body thin, but his eyes still held that same unbreakable light. Scout rushed to him, nudging under his chin, and for the first time, Leo allowed himself to rest. Sarah turned her living room into a kind of memorial. Owen Miller's badge, the restored photographs, the folded American flag sent from the state police department, and with all of it, a framed picture of Leo, standing proudly on the porch next to Scout, the morning sun rising behind them. The Border Collie's brilliant coat shone in the light, a symbol of loyalty and a life of profound strength. The town never forgot what he did. They held a ceremony, and the mayor called him a hero. Rossi called him a legend. But Sarah just called him family. And every morning after that, rain or shine, Leo would sit on the porch, just as he had on that very first day, not as a soldier, but as a guardian, a survivor, and a friend.